When expert divers plan exploration of deep underwater cave systems, they try to prepare for all kinds of emergencies. Despite the effort to cover all bases, nature can deliver the most stunning threats to life, and when the tanks are empty, even the best divers cannot survive. This is the fatal breakdown of the Indian Springs Terror. Parker Turner and Bill Gavin had been meticulously planning this cave exploration dive for months. They were part of the early adopters of using mixed gases for deep dives, so they carefully made tables to determine what mixes would be needed and how long they expected to be at each depth. As part of the Woodville Karst Plain project, they were continuing to explore the vast spring system to find connections between them. Today's dive would be in the Indian Springs cave system, hoping to find a connection between these tunnels and the larger Leon Sink system. At the end of the maze of tunnels, there was a deep chamber called the Wakula Room. Their plan was to explore this room for any signs of connection to the rest of the tunnel system in the area. A few other divers would be entering the system with them, but they would be near the entrance, opting for a more scenic dive while they waited for Bill and Parker to return. George Irvine and Lamar English would be checking out the downstream section of this tunnel, around 1,000 feet into the cave system. For Parker and Bill, they would be facing a much more challenging dive. They would be penetrating over 4,000 linear feet into the cave system, and then going down below 300 feet in depth, exploring the Wakula Room for at least 20 minutes. Switching between two different types of gas would be required for this dive, so the men would be carrying 4 tanks of air each. They needed one set of bottles with nitrox for the traverse to get to the Wakula Room and back, then a second connected set mounted on their backs, called doubles, with trimix for the deep dive to explore the room. Parker's nitrox tanks weren't quite full, but he didn't expect to use the entire tank during the dive anyway. Additional tanks were left near the entrance cavern for their decompression stop, which would be necessary after diving to such significant depths. They made the 40-minute dive to get to the Wakula Room, using their scooters to move efficiently against the current. It was 4,116 feet into the cave, which required the men to pass through several tight restrictions and narrow tunnels to reach this room. For most, just this initial traverse would be too much to fathom. The deeper you went into the cave, the farther you were from any source of air to save you. It must have weighed in their minds to some extent, but they were professionals. They had decades of diving experience to rely on, which kept them focused on the goal at hand, finding a new connection between the springs. The exploration went as planned, but they didn't find what they were looking for. A little disappointed, they prepared to head back to the entrance at Indian Springs. Bill and Parker switched back to their nitrox bottles for the more shallow trip back to the spring. Having spent 25 minutes exploring using the trimix gas, they were in for a long decompression once they reached the entrance. It would be at least 4 hours sitting in the water at various stops to get the nitrogen out of their blood before surfacing. Without decompression stops, they would certainly be dead. The instant bubbling of nitrogen escaping the blood at sea level pressures would cause pulmonary or cerebral embolisms that would kill them within minutes. When they reached the T-junction that led back to the entrance, they saw the familiar arrow drawn in many cave systems pointing the way to the nearest exit. These permanent markers indicate the direction of the closest exit. The men took a left and knew that the entrance was just 900 feet away, beyond a tight section called Squaw's Restriction. Following the permanent line, Bill could see that the tunnel was cloudy with silt ahead of them. They followed along until they came to an inexplicable sight. The line just disappeared into the ground under sand and gravel. They pulled it up, but it went nowhere. Bill was not sure what he was looking at now, because visibility had reduced to less than 1 foot. Their confusion left them feeling vulnerable, not knowing where they were or how to get out of the narrow tunnel. Being vulnerable underwater is never a comfortable feeling, but we all share that feeling of vulnerability when it comes to scammers and thieves trying to profit from our exposed information. There is a staggering amount of personal information, compiled by data brokers, used to steal identities, find connections with family members, and even scam parents or grandparents, with just enough real information to be absolutely believable. It feels sickening to know that your own father was scammed out of thousands of dollars by sick criminals who copy phone numbers, scrub social media, look at private financial information, and even personal court proceedings. That's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. They actively remove your personal information from data broker sites and keep it from returning automatically, and you don't have to do anything. When you sign up with Aura, you get so much more value than other similar companies. You get monthly reports, credit monitoring, and additional free products to keep your data safe, like a VPN and antivirus protection, all included when you sign up. Use the link in the description to get a 14-day free trial to see how they can protect you. Aura will start scrubbing your information from the web right away, and the progress will be reported directly to you. In this increasingly digital world, a system for securing your personal information is crucial. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video. Please show your support by clicking the link in the description to try Aura for free today. And now, back to the underwater caves of Indian Spring. Up in the spring pool, George and Lamar were recounting an incredible event to the others on the surface. They had been sitting in the cavern area of the spring, completing their decompression stop after diving. George floated to the ceiling and put his head up into an air pocket collected at the top. Just as George started to pull himself down, a torrent of silt and rock started flowing from the hole above. The vision was unlike anything they had ever seen before. They pushed up to the surface to see that the water level in the pool had fallen nearly a foot. The water from the tunnel was normally filling the pool and running off to the river in the lowest corner. This was bizarre and no one could explain it. After watching the pool level for another 20 minutes, they could see that it was rising back to its regular place and everything seemed normal again. It never occurred to any of them that Parker and Bill might be struggling to survive, just a few hundred feet away. Bill's nitrox tank was now empty, so he switched to the back-mounted Trimix doubles he had used in the Wakulla room. Parker tied off his safety reel to the main line and moved out to search for the exit. Bill followed the main line back to the T-junction arrow to alleviate any doubts about their location, and it was clear this was the only way out. Parker and Bill started digging and pulling, hoping to free the line from the sand and rock that now buried it. They had been frantically working to discover the path for nearly 45 minutes. When cave tunnels are shown on a map, the path looks straight, clear, and defined. But in reality, it is a twisting and turning pathway with obstacles throughout. When air is in limited quantities and confusion gives way to panic, 45 minutes of searching and digging is an eternity. Parker was now down to 400 psi in his doubles, and he wrote on the slate, "What do we do?" Bill wasn't really sure either. They were running out of air, and there wasn't a path back to the pool on the other side of this restriction. He wrote, "Hold on, I'll go look." Bill tied his reel off and went out looking for an opening. Parker was frantic. He could see that his air was nearly gone, and he was literally left with just a few minutes to get this figured out. The visibility was less than a foot, so orienting himself was a challenge, especially considering that there was an open path here just an hour before. He knew that the main line led to the exit, so he doubled his efforts to dig and pull, hoping to break through to the other side with each sweep of his hand. He could barely see his hands, but he could feel the gritty silt packed in front of him. He quickly unclipped his doubles from his back and pushed his way through the tight hole he was digging out. After several more minutes of struggle, Parker felt the blast of a current, and his hand pushed through to empty space. He was having to suck to pull the air from his regulator, and knew that he was just 2 minutes away from having nothing at all in his tank. He might have another minute of holding his breath, and then, that was it. He used every bit of strength and will to scoop a path around the line to make space for his body to push through. After his body cleared, he yanked on his doubles tank and pulled them through to the other side. His safety line was tied to the main line back on the other side, and now it was snagged on his manifold from all the pulling and twisting to get through. He jerked the tanks and pulled toward the exit, but there was no time. He couldn't free them, but needed the last pull of air it could offer. He was positively buoyant and kept rising higher away from his deco tanks, full of the oxygen he so desperately needed. He pulled his last breath from the doubles and frantically moved toward the tanks sitting just 100 feet away, fighting against his buoyancy. On a breath hold, he moved in the direction of safety, and then everything went black. Bill was desperate to find an alternate opening, but he knew there was only one. The visibility was so bad, he could not see his own hand reaching out in front of him. After a few minutes, he turned back to the main line determined to find the path. His doubles only had 300 psi left, and he needed to get the last air from his other stage bottle. When he reached the main line, he switched to his last bottle of air, and it registered just 600 psi of air. Bill pushed toward the restriction that he knew was there somewhere. In just 4 minutes, the tank was completely empty. He went back to his doubles. The absolute last bit of air he had, just 300 psi. It would be enough for just a few minutes of effort. As Bill swam down the line, he was overwhelmed with the most desperate feeling he had ever had. He was going to die. He couldn't see anything beyond his hand, so he stuck with the line and pushed ahead with incredible effort. He twisted and turned, then felt the line going up. On his last breath of air from the tank, he realized that this was the cavern on the other side of the restriction. He had made it through, which meant decompression tanks must be sitting just ahead. He sucked the final breath from the tank and swam with all he had. He was starting to hold his breath when the silty room began to clear, and his tank became visible just ahead. Bill grabbed the regulator and drew a deep breath of air from the fresh tank. He was literally 60 seconds from passing out and certain death. After that first breath, he quickly realized that Parker was not here breathing from his own decompression bottles, so that could mean only one thing. Parker Turner had drowned. Lamar went down to the deco bottles to see if Parker and Bill had made it back yet. They were seriously behind schedule, and the silty avalanche had clouded up the entire cavern area. He could see that there was a set of tanks laying on the main line and a flashlight, but no Bill or Parker in sight. He alerted the top crew, and George went down to search for the guys. He could barely see a few feet at a time, but felt along the ceiling of the cavern to see if anyone was floating. He was stunned when he reached out and grasped someone not moving. He pulled him close and quickly realized that it was Bill Gavin. He was breathing from his stage deco bottle, but was in a daze. George tried to communicate with him, but only got a single response on the tablet. Parker is dead. George flew back to the surface to inform the rest of the crew. Several men went down to sit with Bill while he decompressed. Others searched around for Parker but did not find him. Parker's body was finally located on the roof of the cavern the next day. After traveling 8,000 linear feet over a period of 2.5 hours, Parker fell short, just 30 feet from his decompression bottles. 30 seconds more of air could have saved his life. It was the passage that Parker had created that ended up saving Bill's life. Once the water started flowing back out the spring through this small hole, the silt was cleared out of the restriction much quicker, making a space for Bill to fit with his doubles on his back. Even a moment's delay at that point would have cost Bill his life. Over the next hours and days, everyone tried to piece together the full story of what happened on each side of the restriction. Lamar and George had passed through Squaw's restriction just 4 minutes before the collapse. The timing of the final collapse was just moments after they had passed through. Despite these close calls with death, all 3 surviving divers continued cave diving and exploration for many years. It took nearly 20 years for scientists to discover that it was the bubbles from the decompressing divers which affected the pressure on the ceiling pocket of silty debris. This collapsing pocket of sand was a freak accident that could not have been predicted. Bill and Parker did everything they could to understand what was happening to them and how to deal with it. This fatal accident is just another example of how the most experienced cave divers cannot plan for every eventuality when trapped under the water in narrow caves. Cave diving remains a difficult and often deadly recreational activity,